Most of our lives, we are able to think, feel, and act out of clarity. We can remember important things, know who we are and where we are, but if we experience trauma, we sometimes disconnect, like we will suddenly go offline, we experience numbness and appear cut off. And today you will understand how dissociation actually feels like, you will learn how it protects you and where it comes from, and you will also understand how to re-regulate yourself if you experience depersonalized or derealized states. So stick with me today up till the end and let me know in the comments how you deal with dissociation. Welcome to today's episode. My name is Robert and today we talk about dissociation, and disclaimer here up front, I'm not a health professional and the contents in this video are not to be understood as therapeutic medical instructions or advice, and everything I say here is based on research, my work with therapists, or personal experience. Also, you can listen to this episode on your favorite podcast platform, YouTube, Spotify, or Apple Podcasts, and you find all the links of resources used in this video in the description below. Now, I want to start today's episode with the fact why we all know what dissociation actually is and how it appears within our daily lives. Do you know the situation where you're driving a car and suddenly you become unaware of that you're actually driving the car? So you completely get lost within your thoughts, you fade away and disconnect from yourself, and suddenly when you come back to the here and now, you don't even know what happened, but you actually see that you have driven for like 15 minutes straight without even realizing that you're driving. This gap which appears within our daily lives is what dissociation actually is. Not very intense, but a mild form of dissociation that happens to us from time to time. But there are more types of dissociation we might experience from time to time. The author Forrest Hansen, for example, explains in his video, Dissociation Works Like This, the 3 different levels of dissociation. The first one is, as I said, a really mild everyday experience, as I just explained. For example, you drive with a car and you don't remember for like 10 minutes that you already drove a distance for a couple kilometers. The second level is the more moderate kind of dissociation. This is when you feel numb, for example, after an intense emotional conversation with a friend, or when you're in a relationship and you experience dissociation as a reaction to a traumatic re-experience. And the third level, that's the really clinically significant level when you are facing dissociative disorders like a dissociative identity disorder, or for example, when you have depersonalization, derealization disorders. In this third and severe form of dissociation, what often happens as well is a disconnection that occurs in the usually integrated functions of our consciousness, our memory, identity, or perception. But what actually is dissociation per definition? I found this definition here in the book Trauma Competency, a Clinician's Guide. And this definition says that dissociation is a word that is used to describe the disconnection or lack of connection between things usually associated with each other. Dissociated experiences are not integrated into the usual sense of self, resulting in discontinuities in conscious awareness. So usually those things that are connected with each other are the body and the mind. And when we experience dissociation, we experience a disassociation from the body and the mind. What is also common here, what you might learn in therapy, if you have a great therapist, they might explain that to you like this. Instead of seeing us as a subject of our own perception, we become an object of the outer world. And this is what dissociation also means, that we disconnect from us being the subject and seeing us from the other perspective seen as an object. Thoughts, emotions, and actions are influenced by dissociation. And what people also often report is that thoughts or emotions seem to come out of nowhere, or finding oneself carrying out an action as if it were controlled by a force other than oneself. What I also want to make clear here is that dissociation is a coping mechanism for situations we as human beings, also animals, can't regulate. So first of all, dissociation is a great thing. It's a really, really good and helpful mechanism for us to help to cope. For example, in a trauma situation, when we experience emotional abuse or violence, and dissociation appears to be a freeze response, and according to the polyvagal theory, which I also made a full episode, I will link to you up here, there are 3 states of the central nervous system. The first one is the parasympathetic state, the so-called ventral vagal state, and that's the so relaxed and grounded state where you are fully in the present, where you're fully connected with yourself, where you feel compassion and mindfulness. The second one is a sympathetic state. That's the so-called fight or flight state. So when a threat appears, you are fully alert, you get into this state, and you take action to protect yourself, to run away or to fight. This state is also a state where you are connected with yourself, so you can take action. Your heart rate appears to be accelerated, and you experience feelings like panic, fear, or anxiety. But you definitely feel these emotions, and they appear to you really strongly in such state. And then there's the third one, and that's the dorsal vagal freeze response. It's also a sympathetic state, but this one is activated when you feel overwhelmed, when you don't have a solution to fight or to flight. So you have to find another way to cope with a threat, and this is when you freeze. This is when dissociation appears. It's a state where you can't move. It's a state where you disconnect your body and mind. For example, when a tiger appears behind you, it's too late to run away. Then you have to find a way to deal with the situation, and instead of fighting it or running away, you freeze, you hold that position, you disconnect, and you see yourself from above. You probably also do not feel any emotions. You do not feel any pain. You just try to hold yourself in that position until the threat is gone. So summarize, dissociation, put in simple terms, is a coping mechanism that separates your body from your mind within an acute, inescapable situation, which results in a freeze state. And this is also roughly how dissociation actually feels like. I can give you an example from myself. For me, dissociation is also an accompanying phenomenon of emotional dysregulation that appears, for example, in CPTSD. I may chill around during the day, and when something brings up emotions I didn't learn to regulate as a child, for example, anger, then I might dissociate and I might disconnect from myself. I become numb at first, for example, in a discussion, and to me it appears like I'm slightly drunk, just like having 2 beers, and then I would feel like I'm in a tunnel, right? I'm disconnecting my perception here, and I just can't see clear. There is no clarity in my mind. There is just fog around. It feels like something or someone takes over control over my body, and it feels like I don't have access to memories and behaviors I would usually have. In general, when you feel dissociated, you are taken over by an emotion that does not really seem to make sense at that time. It's like being a passenger in one's body rather than the driver. And another sensation that might appear in people who dissociate is that time feels super slow or super fast. According to the ISSTD, the International Society for the Study of Trauma and Dissociation, there are 5 different types of dissociation listed. You find a really great summary of all the studies and definitions on their page in their dissociations FAQ, and I summarize them for you as well here in today's episode. The first type of dissociation is also used synonyms sometimes, similar to the second type. I will get to that one later. But the first one is depersonalization. And depersonalization is the sense of being detached from or not in one's body, in simple terms. It's described as the classical out-of-body experiences. Many therapists also talk about these. It's like you would see your body from the top, from above, like you're hovering above your body and lying yourself and looking down to you, laying there on the ground or in the bed or wherever you are. Some might also try to achieve this experience with mind-expanding substances or things like deep meditation, but for people with CPTSD, it's absolutely free. Some people might also have a sense of alienation from their bodies, so they feel like their bodies is not there and they don't even recognize themselves in the mirror, or they don't also recognize their face, or simply feel not connected at all to their body. The second type I want to talk about here is derealization. Derealization is, put in simple terms, is a sense of the world not being real. So you think, well, nothing is real. Not the glass here is real. I'm not real. The world around me is not real. And to them, the world looks phony. It looks foggy, far away, or as if they're seen through a veil. And in such a derealized state, you see the world if you were detached from it, or if you are watching a movie. And that's a pretty typical mechanism that especially happens in trauma situations. For example, when you read literature from Dr. Peter Levine, then you would know these situations where Levine describes when he got hit by a car and completely derealizes from the world. And the whole world around him in that described scenario does not appear real to him. The third type is dissociative amnesia. That's actually a pretty severe one already. So depersonalization and derealization are also typical types of dissociation you might experience when you experience traumatic events. Dissociative amnesia is, on the other hand, pretty severe phenomenon here. And it is the inability to recall important personal information, and this inability is so extensive that it is not due to ordinary forgetfulness. It also, in some kind, happens to dissociation happening when you have traumatic flashbacks or re-experiencing, but the intensity of this forgetfulness is still not that intense as it would be when you experience real amnesia here. And what I mean by that is that you actually don't have any access to these information that you normally constantly have access to. Amnesias also are often really important events that are forgotten, such as emotional abuse, physical abuse, a troubling incident, or even a block of time for minutes to years. There are also some forms of microamnesias where the discussion engaged is not remembered. For example, when you talk with someone, you are in a discussion, in a conversation, and suddenly the content of the conversation is forgotten from one moment to another. And these kinds of conversations often then leave the other person kind of scrambling to figure out what actually the conversation was about, because they didn't notice it. And in the meanwhile, they try to not let the other person with whom they are talking with realize that they don't have any clue what they actually just said. I think those forms of microamnesias we sometimes have from time to time, especially we do have when we have traumatic re-experiencing, when you, for example, have a scenario with your partner or with a parent of yours, and you are remembered to a situation in the past where you actually shut down before, and now you're in a similar situation again, and your mind tries to shut down again, so you disconnect within that acute situation. Number 4, identity confusion. To make that short, identity confusion is the sense of confusion about who a person actually is. That's, for example, happening when you have a discrepancy in something you really, really like. Let's say a person finds thrill within an activity once, and at another time, the same person experienced that same activity as repugnant. So that's really confusing because there are those two sides, but those two sides are the complete opposite. In the one scenario, the person loved the thrill. In the other situation, the person hates the thrill. And number 5, identity alteration. Identity alteration is the sense of being markedly different from another part of oneself. So to explain that, a person who experiences identity alteration may shift into an alternative personality and therefore become super confused. If you have these kind of experiences, you may experience distortions in time, place, and situation. And a really good example for that is, imagine you're in a therapy session and you talk with your therapist about a scenario where you have been 5 years old. And this scenario may be a traumatic scenario, so you might actually get sucked into this reality when you have been 5. And while you're in the therapist's office, you start to believe that you're actually that child living in the childhood's home, not in the office, and expecting a decreased person whom they actually fear appear at any moment. So you are really experiencing the same situation that you experienced decades ago in the office of your therapist, for example. Here is an overview over the 5 types we just talked about, with dissociation as the basis here. And dissociation summarized is: I feel detached from thoughts, feelings, and actions. Then we have depersonalization. I don't feel real. Derealization. The world around me doesn't feel real. Nothing in this world really feels real. Then we have amnesia. I can't remember. So you have a lack of your memories. And then we have confusion and alteration. Who am I? That's the really severe form. Now, let's get to the question, what to do when we experience dissociation. What can you actually do? For people who experience severe forms of dissociation regularly, I truly recommend working with a therapist here. I also did that. So I discovered my forms of dissociation through therapy, through working with my first therapist, and therefore I started to become aware what dissociation actually is, when dissociation appears to me, and I'm still figuring that out, but it helped tremendously to reduce dissociation within my daily lives while working with a therapist. I absolutely recommend that to you. I also made a full episode up here where we talked about therapy as a great option to deal with such things like dissociation and other things that people with PTSD or neurodivergent people, highly sensitive people, experience from time to time. Therapy and trauma healing are absolutely the best ways to get rid of dissociation long term, but what can you do if you now, in the here and now, experience dissociation regularly, how can you re-regulate this state of disconnection? Now I have 5 steps for you here to re-regulate that acute dissociative state. Number 1 is that you become aware that you are dissociated and pause if possible. It's also really important for you to understand that you are actually dysregulated when you are dissociated, and that dissociation is a part of your reactions within your central nervous system, that it's a coping mechanism, and that you're actually frozen when you experience dissociation. So you are up here on that dorsal vagal free state when you experience dissociation, and this is what you truly have to understand at first. And to feel better, you can go through the following steps, go through the fight or flight state, achieve more control again over the actions, and then get back to the ventral vagal state. Now, this is why the second step we're talking about here is creating safety, because safety brings you back to the ventral vagal state. You can use various skills here, and you can also just change the environment or look for people and places who will make you feel super safe. Skills and tools you can use to feel safe again and to cope with those stressful situations are, for example, just going for a walk to get the central nervous system going, to give yourself the opportunity to actually run away because you are moving. That's a good thing. Just do a workout, because giving your body the fight impulse is also a good thing to get back into the sympathetic state, to activate your body and give your central nervous system the opportunity to feel better and to regain control. You can also tap your body, reconnect with your body, feel your body. You can listening, for example, to self-meditation, to self-hypnosis, to calming sounds. There is so much here on YouTube. Anything that stops your dysregulated state and brings you back in the connection in the here and now. Then, number 3, actually reducing the escape and freeze mechanism by calming down body and mind, for example, while using co-regulation. That's a beautiful tool to use. For example, co-regulating with your partner, with your pet if you have any, and therefore climbing back to the lower level, to the ventral vagal state, and finally feel relaxed again, feel regulated again, and feel associated again with your body. Number 4 is using your brain again. What we often do after a dissociative state is that we do not realize what actually happened. And that's not good, because we just don't know what we missed. So there is this gap within our memories now. And it helps to reflect on the situation, what happened during this dissociated state. Write that down and try to connect with these memories, try to connect with that experience to get a better understanding of what dissociation actually does to you, and maybe why you also dissociate. Can you identify the trigger here? What have you been so afraid of? Why did you feel that numbness in your body? And number 5, finally reconnect with your body and mind completely again in the ventral vagal state when you're in a safe place. You can go through these 5 steps and practice the awareness, which is the thing that is missing because you disconnect, when dissociation appears to you. And now some final thoughts from my side. I think dissociation is a pretty common thing, but at the same time, a really important piece of the puzzle when trying to understand symptoms of a complex post-traumatic stress disorder or of childhood trauma. So when you experience dissociation, it's often one of those things that you might be afraid of as well, because it makes you disconnect, it makes you feel less, and it makes living through your daily lives and routines so hard. It also makes relationships pretty hard. And it's really exhausting to continuously just leaving yourself, leaving your body, missing out on things. So it's definitely worse to have a closer look and to better understand dissociation, what it does to you, and what actually triggers it within your daily lives. What do you think about dissociation? What is actually triggering dissociation in you? If you have experienced trauma or emotional neglect within your childhood, definitely let me know in the comments below. If you want to support this podcast, leave me a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. I see and speak to you in the next episode. Have a great day.